Hi everyone. We're gonna start now, so we don't get too much delayed for the next session at 11:30, or it's 11:30, right? Okay. So I want to thank Ngugi Thiong'o for his presentation, his remarks last night, but also for his lifetime of work, and also for squeezing Chile in between all the other things he was doing this summer. So thank you. I think there were so many key issues that Ngugi addressed last night, both in his remarks and in the question period, that they resonated so much with what we've been talking about over the past 2 weeks. And I'm just going to list some of the phrases that I think that were Ngugi's, that kind of were things that kind of echoed in my mind for some of the things that we have been talking about. So Ngugi, one of the things you talked about was the monolingualism of the conquerors. And I thought that was a really interesting concept for us. You also, and that a so-called shared language of a nation state actually is based on the exclusion of other languages, so that it's not really shared in that sense. You also talked about every language as a memory bank of knowledge. And this actually resonated with me, actually, with Donna's talk. The language is a memory bank of knowledge and of a culture. You said, I mourn for the languages that we have let die. I mourn for the languages we have let die. And you talked about linguicide. And I thought that was a really interesting idea, genocide, linguicide, and so on. You talked about translation not as a command, but as a conversation. And I thought that was, you don't command translations, you have translations as conversation. It's slightly glossed by me, added by Jane. You say, we can use inherited languages. There's nothing in the DNA of French that prevents it from communicating. I've added the DNA part, but that wasn't you. But you said we can use inherited language. There's nothing in French, for example, that prevents it from communicating. That was an interesting thought. You talked about the density of all languages, how all languages are based on inherited, different other languages are embedded within languages. I thought that was interesting. You said a monolingual country starves itself. A monolingual country starves itself. And you said then also, we cannot always be slaves to history, but we must move ahead. And those were some of the things that you said that I thought were resonated with, for me anyway, with the things that we've been saying over the past 2 weeks. You're finishing your remarks with a performance of the Yalada translation project. It reminded me, and of the Upright Revolution, reminded me of our poetry. That project reminded me of our 2 poetry readings that we've had, where there's a kind of, circulation of languages all together. Not 87, we didn't have 87, but it did. And so I thought that was a kind of a larger version of our poetry readings that we've had. Your dominant words were collaborative. You used terms like orchestra of languages and networks of languages. So I thought that we've been interested in communities of language and communities of languages, so I thought that was interesting. Finally, I reviewed my notes for Yala Kisukidi's talk, and this notion of diaspora and where the language of diaspora is, made me really think of how Gikuyu is not, for you, a language that is located only in Kenya, but it's also in conversation with all of these amazing artists in Los Angeles, in that performance space, right? So Gikuyu itself can wander, can be elsewhere. So it made me sort of review my notes of Yala's talk. I was reminded of Gabi talking about affiliation rather than filiation. So languages can affiliate with one another rather than only be single sources. So those are some of the ideas that I took away from Ngugi's talk, and trying to sort of bring them in conversation with what we've been talking about for the last 2 weeks. And it's a little unfair to you, Ngugi, because you haven't been here. So with that, those are my ideas. So if I'm open the floor to people's questions to Ngugi, and welcome your preguntas.
Yes, thank you. It was very challenging, this main idea that traverses your work, which one could describe almost as an ecology of languages, as there is an ecology of forms of being, of animals, or in the sense that there's this intent of preserving languages as preserving ways of existence. Which include, among others, specific ways of memory that belong to different people. Memory is inscribed in the lexicon, as you were saying yesterday, but also, as you insisted, in the very musicality of languages and other forms of expression that are different in different languages. And I was impressed by some strategies that you were promoting between the lines to preserve or to sustain this ecology of language. There are some that are on the realm of the political that I'm interested, but I want to stress those that have to do with translation. In the political, obviously, there's decolonization and there is anti-authoritarianism. I mean, not only colonial government, but also internal authoritarian governments have always forbidden the proliferation of languages. I mean, it was the case with Franco in Spain, it was the case with Pinochet in Chile, where Easter Island language or Mapuche not only were not taught, but very often forbidden. So those has to do with political, very direct actions, but I'm going to stress for the time being two translation-related strategies that I saw in your presentation yesterday. One that I thought it was very important was this idea of translating directly among what are considered minor or excluded languages. So let's say you're going to translate directly from Mapuche to Swahili, and not from Mapuche to Spanish, from Spanish to English, and from English to Swahili. So it's this kind of complicity in resistance to the major languages, this direct translation among minor languages, which is something seldom done. Normally, when you go, let's say, from Mapuche to an African language, you would pass through Spanish and English, and you would be deceived by the forms of expression and by the ways of reception of this dominant language, which should control the passage between minor languages. And I thought that this idea of like skipping major languages was a very interesting idea to ensure this ecology of language. The second, and this is the last thing I'm going to say, has to do with this kind of metaphor, but I think it's a very interesting metaphor to think the kinship between languages. If languages, as you say, are musical instruments or can be thought as musical instruments, then the kinship between language, the common language of humanity, is like an orchestra. An orchestra, what is interesting about this metaphor of the orchestra is that it's a dynamic and flexible structure. It's not a fixed structure. It's a structure where you can put different arrangements together according to what you're going to play. So this idea of a language of kinship between humanity, which is neither the original language, not the universal language, but a structure which is both collaborative and dynamic, that can have many arrangements. And I think those two strategies impress me as very effective strategies of translation, that are backing this ecology of language that you propose, this idea that languages have to be preserved as preserving ways of existence. So my question had to do with what other strategies, beyond these two that I could grasp from your talk last night, you think are very important to preserve languages, which I think is a very tricky thing, because languages have to be preserved. It's the same as ecology. You can preserve animals that are disappearing in zoos, but it doesn't work, because even if they live, because you put them in a cage. And when you preserve languages, you have this double task of preserving them, but keeping them alive as free working languages and not as objects of museum. So what other strategies you think are very important for this ecology of languages, this preserving languages as preserving ways of existence? Thank you.
Okay. Hello. Yeah. Very interesting ideas. Now, let me first of all say, first in terms of language contact, I personally have no problem right now with using, say, Spanish for instance, to enable conversation, even if it's indirect, between what's the language again? Mapuche?
Mapuche.
Yeah, yeah, but Mapuche is the people. Their language is called something else.
Quechua.
The language
No.
is Mapudungun.
Mapudungun. Yeah, of the Mapuche people.
Okay.
Yeah. You see, I'm getting to. I'm displaying my knowledge of Chile. Anyway, even between African languages right now, you not like to get any two scholars or one scholar for that matter, except very few like Barbara over there who knows Wolof and Barbara and so on. So like him, he might be able to translate between Barbara and Wolof directly, but otherwise you have to pass through a third language. So I'm just saying we can look at English, Spanish, and other dominant languages, no matter how they came to be dominant, to enable without disabling. What do I mean by that? In a colonial situation or post-colonial situation, the elite or the educated sector of those populations, to the extent that they are educated in Spanish, English, and French, and they express themselves, their production of ideas is in French, Spanish, and so on, to that extent, it's French or Spanish enables visibility on one hand for them as writers or intellectuals, but invisibility in their own communities. So you get this magical transformation where they become visible all over and completely invisible in their own languages, and cultures, So I'm just saying that we cannot wait until everybody knows, say, I know Gikuyu and Wolof, for instance, but we can use whatever. I can use French to enable contact between Gikuyu and Wolof without that disabling, without that making me invisible in my own language or in Wolof. So I'm using, say, the dominant English to enable without disabling. At present, they simply disable. By that means they uproot the intellectuals and intellectual production from their language communities. Yeah. But you can use whatever. It could be French, it could be Wolof, it could be any other language. Can play that role of enabling two languages to come into contact with each other. Yeah. Of course, the ideal would be to get a scholar who, if we can normalize, see, it's a kind of a catch-22. If we can normalize the existence of these languages and their use freely and so on, then we'll get more scholars who know more than two languages, who know Kiswahili and Spanish and French and so on, right? Yeah. But we are not in that stage yet, yeah. So that I see that as part of the overall struggle. In other words, what I'm trying to say is, for me, translation also, the struggle for translation also assumes many other things that we have to fight for, like fighting for the smaller languages to be, not even smaller languages, because some languages are very big in terms of people speaking them. Say, for instance, Yoruba in Nigeria alone has 40 million speakers. 40 million speakers. And yet, when you put Yoruba as against, say, Danish, which is 4 million people, they talk of Danish as major language, and Yoruba as some kind of, I don't know exactly, in terms of conception and so on, yeah. So for me, when we fight for translation, we have at the same time be fighting for other things. For instance, the right of languages to be, pressurize government and to put resources. Say we are in Chile, it's not enough for a government to say we support Mapuche. More important is the resources they put into Mapuche, so it becomes a more to strengthen its functionality, if you like. Yeah. Thereafter, both Spanish and Mapuche gain from each other, right? It will be no longer Spanish there and Mapuche there, but some kind of more of what I'm calling this, they form a network of equal give and take, yeah. But just now everything is lopsided. Even translation within this lopsided hierarchical system we have adopted can make even translation become also lopsided, like one-way bridge, if there's such a thing. But a bridge can never, inherently can never be. So we want translations to be like bridges, right? But a bridge assumes, if you like, equality of two spaces, yeah? And to and flow from one to the other and the other way around, yeah. So basically I have no problem in using whatever is the dominant language at the time, or the more visible language at any one time, to enable these other communications, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I want to push these ideas even a slightly bit further and add the notion of immersion to the notion of translation. And with immersion, I'm having in mind a radical transformation of the educational system that would have to form the basis for changing our ecology of languages. I'm thinking about one school in Los Angeles. It's called the Academia de los Semillas. I think for me it's the model of a radically transformative thinking. The children come there from age 5. They are immersed in each child is immersed in 4 different languages. They do, by default, English, Spanish, but they do Nahuatl because a lot of the children come from Chican ex-communities. And then they do Mandarin, with the argument that each child should be immersed in a language of a culture that is not in any way the culture of their families of origin. But then, in addition to that, they also learn 2 systems of mathematics, the conventional one and the Mayan mathematical system, with the idea that they learn that even something as hardcore as mathematics is a relative system of knowledge. And at the same time, I mean, what I'm after is how that ecology of languages translates into very different ecologies of mind, because they learn and experience firsthand that systems of knowledge become systems of confinement unless they are brought into conversation with each other. So this said, I should also add that the academia comes consistently under real threat and pressures, including pressures of terror attacks, because there's a right-wing movement against it, claiming that they disseminate un-American values. And that is as a footnote to the monolingualism. But I wonder what you think about the immersion idea.
Yeah. Of course, anything, you see, anything that we know that when children live in our neighbors where many languages are spoken, they have no problem in moving to and fro among the many languages which surround them. Okay, yeah. The problem has always been the politics surrounding language use and language relationship. For instance, all authoritarian regimes, the first thing they go for is monolingualism. Whether it's Franco in Spain, or right now, the first thing I was told that the guy who has assumed power in Britain right now, Boris or something, apparently the person he's saying is that there are some sections of England or Britain where English is not the first language, meaning he wants everybody, English to be the first language of every community. In other words, he's only thinking, even before he has sat on the on the seat of power, he only think about monolingualism of the powerful, right? So monolingualism and authoritarianism tend to go together. Yeah. So anything literally that, including immersion, that makes students be more aware of other languages. Not even be more aware, they will adapt. There's no problem really, right? But the problem comes in the area of politics, for the allocation of resources. By this I mean, I know in African countries, there are, even African Union has come out with very nice resolutions about African languages, but zero resources are put into African languages, so we just come back to to the question of power. Yeah. The question of resources, if you say you're going to respect, say, local Chilean, indigenous Chilean languages, then the question comes out, how much of the resources are put into those languages? How much should you make them become part of the power sharing, if you like? By that I mean that make them languages through which you can also function in that society. Yeah. Just now in Kenya, where I come from, even if a government says, "Oh, we love African languages," but I know that if my child has English, he or she has a chance of moving forward or gaining something from society because they have English. So the parent may have to choose between, do I want this lovely local language to be, or do I want my children to also be able, when they go apply for a job at the university or other places, do I want to give them that advantage or not? So it seems to me that the question of language, any translation, is a much bigger problem and societal, in the sense that And that's why I keep on coming back to the question of hierarchy, because the conception of hierarchy has become part of DNA, to use, to use your term. People cannot, sometimes policymakers cannot think of a relationship which is not hierarchy. And hierarchy means that in order for, okay, let me illustrate. By hierarchy, I mean, if just now, you see, that's not hierarchy. But you want hierarchy, she will sit on me, okay? Right? We're still, but hierarchy, it changes the relationship, when she's sitting on me, she's depending on me, so to speak, it's a parasitic relationship, if you like. Yeah. And parasitic relationship is really something you find in the animal and plant kingdoms, really. But the other one of give and take, I'm calling it network for lack of a better word, think of network. That means mutual enrichment. Yeah. So I use languages more or less as a metaphor of that society where I am, to use a Zulu expression, I am because you are. Yeah.
I'm sorry, Commissioner.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the talk yesterday, Ngugi. I wanted to ask about, we think about languages in terms of the arts and the humanities, but I'm wondering whether we ought to be thinking about the sciences and the way in which language and its dominance in one respect, it's the monolingualism, operates through the sciences. And I'm thinking particularly, I'm going to use a very local example. When Afrikaner nationalism in South Africa became a dominant force, it invented a language for teaching medicine. So one of the things it did was because Afrikaans has been around for a long time, it's a slave language. It's a language that comes out of slavery. It's not a language of white nationalism. But yet what it did after 1948, it constituted these university programs in medicine and in the sciences, so you could teach Afrikaans, you could teach the sciences in Afrikaans. And I'm wondering what the relationship, is this something that we need to take seriously as we think about the projects that you've been engaged in, to think a little beyond the humanities and the arts about how language functions and how it might be preserved?
But science begins with, I don't want to go into my little theories, but indulge me for a little while. I'm going to my little theories. Science and technology begin with the human body. The integrity of the human body. Everything we do or have done in the world is no more than a projection of what the body already has. Technology of making things begins with the hands, isn't it? Well, maybe the other, Everything else is really an extension of this natural technology we already have, with the hands. And you can see everything, including machines which lift things, try to imitate the hands, more or less. It's a kind of projection of the hands. Okay. Technologies of walking, we already have it. The legs, right? Literally, the body is everything, the human body. So the sciences are already embedded, if you like, in the very structure of the human body. Say technologies of movement, of motion. We already have it we have our legs already. Yeah. Technically, if it took very many years, there's no reason why we cannot walk from one end of the world to the other. So their technologies enhance that capability which we already have. Okay. We can go on. technologies of seeing, the telescope, yeah, technologies of hearing, technologies of circulation, and now little technology of memory, with computers and so on. I mean, so already the body, the human body itself already has in it all what we call knowledge, whether sciences or technology, is already there in the human body. You might think of the world as a purely projection of what is already in the body. So languages can and should also be able to reflect that. That in that sense, there's no language which cannot embrace what is already in the body, because the rest is an extension of what is in the body. I've come around to the human body as the source of everything. Even the conception of governance, by the way. You look at the head, how is the human body, when you see the human body upright revolution, the head at the top. So what do they do in terms of vocabulary? We talk about head of state, because we look at the relationship of the head as being, and the brains as being the master, and the body as being full of feelings and emotions and so on. So we project these things onto people who are a little bit more oppressed in relation to the others. They have emotions. The others who are, they are the ones who use the head. Rationality resides in them. I mean, so anyway, what I'm trying to say is that, yes, there's no language which cannot be developed to embrace, to be able to help, to embrace any aspect of knowledge. Yeah, really. It's a hierarchy. The reason I still come back to hierarchy all the time, because it's the one which suppresses. It's like, it's like having very many libraries. And you see the library in Chile is a library of libraries. All we need is ban all the others. And we leave the one in Chile or something like that. Yeah. So, any language, Zulu, Kikoyo, Swahili, can do that. Because already, in terms of that language description of the human body, it's already describing all those possibilities. Yeah. That's my little theory, but I'm sort of the human body. Yeah. And that's, by the way, if I can expand on that a little bit, in all oppressive systems, the first thing that's attacked is the body of the other. Even at an individual level, the bully in the schoolyard, whether South Africa or Kenya, what do they attack in the other person? They don't argue about knowledge. They argue about the human, their body. They try to weaponize the body against the other person, correct? Yeah. They talk about the body to make one's body becomes a weapon against self. And we see it, man-woman relationship, for instance, or enslaving and enslaved. The body all the time is the first to be attacked, it's like weaponizing the body of the other against them. Because when you weaponize the body, you weaponize the body against itself. All the other systems of knowledge and all the possibilities carried by the human body. Yeah.
Can I ask a question about your own practice and identity as a writer? When you think of the work that you wrote in English and the work that you wrote in Kikuyu, do you think of yourself as a different writer? How do you imagine the continuity or the lack of continuity between the two writers that you clearly are?
What the writer in English and the writer in Gikuyu?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Each language has its own challenges and its own musicality. I come back to the musicality of languages. Yeah. You know that there are some expressions in any language where you say, "Oh, that cannot be said in any other language." I mean, how can you say this? So it sounds so particular to that language, and because of the arrangements of sounds and how they relate to each other, you know. So every language, no matter how big or small, has that unique musicality to itself, and no one language can replace or really capture. I mean, the musicality of the other. It's like I use the word piano and violin. No matter how you do with a piano, you know, it's not quite violin. Although they can play the same melody, right? You can convert so that you can play the same melody. There's no problem with that, you know. But still, the musicality of the violin and the texture of the sound is different from the texture of the piano or the trumpet and so on, right? You know. So languages have also that. So when I'm writing in Gikuyu language, it's really also exploiting the musicality of Gikuyu language, okay? If I'm writing in English, I try to exploit the musicality of English, except that English may not always have the same resonance for me as Gikuyu, okay? But still, you're doing the same thing, trying to exploit the musicality of both languages, you know. And there's, musicality of both languages, yeah. So also as Welsh, I'm sure it's got its musicality, that's why people feel, oh, you cannot say this in any other language, you know. This is how you say it, you know. Yeah.
I suppose I was also asking about whether the different languages pushed you to write different things, to actually attack different subjects.
They can be, I'm trying to think. Yeah, they can. You know, one language. If I'm writing a poem, because the sound system might make me think of a different kind of poem from the one I might write in Gikuyu language, for instance. Yeah. Again, we come back to musical instrument. When you don't play you maybe play the same melody, but when you're using the piano, different way of handling the same, and when you're using the violin, and you play the same melody maybe, or different melody, or the piano might make you think of a different melody, you know, as opposed to when I'm handling a violin, maybe, you know. So, yeah.
I'm going to cough too. This is a follow-up question to Patrick. So I'm thinking about the unique musicality of each language.
The what?
The unique musicality of each language as maybe something that's untranslatable. So how does that play into your practice as a translator?
Oh,
When you're translating your work from Gikuyu to English, how do you engage with the unique musicality of each language?
Let me give an example. I always give, because I found it when I was translating Wizard the Crow into English. There is one of the characters, the dictator in the novel, or one of the characters, has a disease called, is diagnosed as Englishness also, or something like that anyway. But it's called the disease of if, because when he tries to speak, he cannot speak. He cannot say if. He's stuck. Words are stuck. He cannot say if. And at one point, but the word in Gikuyu is koro, 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 meaning you say, oh, if I could go to Chile, koro no te go die, Chile, koro, okay. But koro, the word, also means somebody will catch you. No connection, but the sound system, meaning when children are doing something, like when their parents are away and they are stealing sugar, they might have one on the lookout. And when they see a parent come and say, "Wow, koro, koro, hey, they find you out," or enemies coming, "Wow, koro, koro." So, our difficulties. There's a section in the novel where the person is being interrogated by the police, about this disease, koro, which he says he had. He says, "I had this disease," and he tried to describe the disease in Gikuyu, obviously, and he can't quite explain it how words could get stuck, But at one point, he's angry. He just, he tries to say, the disease of koro. Now the policeman who is interrogating him thinks there's a coup d'etat. They are coming to catch you. So he starts running away. The police starts running away. And he, the one who is being interrogated, he doesn't understand why he's running. So he also starts running away. And when the policeman looks back and sees the other one is running after him, he runs even faster, This is because of the misunderstanding of the word koro, because it's those two meanings. Now, a Gikuyu reader would immediately know what the confusion, where it's coming from. But in English translation, I had to add a few sentences around that, so that when he says if, the policeman can understand that there's possibility of being caught, okay? But it'd be like he would have to say, in English, in him try to explain the word if, then he say, I'm talking, for instance, if there's a coup, or there's a coup, or something like that. So I had to have a few more sentences in the English translation to explain really why the policeman is running away, because it does not make sense otherwise, right? I can't say if and he starts running away. But Ngiko Koro has those two possibilities. So he can hear one meaning and he can act on that other meaning. Yeah. So with translation, for me, then, it means just you have to, again, be aware of both the musicality and the nuances of the different languages, There are things which, if I translate directly, don't make sense in one language. In fact, I tried both. When I first translated my first novel into English, there were times I tried that kind of direct translation, and then it's becoming very awkward. Yeah. So you have to learn how, if you can, sensitivity is important here, what works in each language, and try to get the spirit, but using the musical system of the language into which you are translating, or the other way around. Yeah.
So my question is regarding something that you mentioned yesterday. You said that it was possible to write in any language, but then you're also saying that you need to understand the resonances and the musicality of the language. So for example, let's say Swedish is my 5th language, and then I tried to write in Swedish. Wouldn't the people of Sweden or the people who have inhabited the Swedish language see that I don't understand all the resonances of the language? Like, it's possible indeed that I will write in Swedish, but will it not sound like I'm a foreigner all the time? Because I haven't inhabited the language for long enough to understand the weight of the words, for example, or the meanings. Like, it is possible to write, but
the funny thing about language is that actually even a foreigner can bring something into that other language. Their foreignness, so to speak, can bring something into the language into which they are, say, writing. For instance, Chinua Achebe, Things Fall Apart, for instance. He is a complete master at rendering African proverbs into English. I know of no other writer, including this one, who can do that. And makes it feel so natural. So natural that at one point, there's somebody who was helping launch my book. He was a guest of honor in Kenya for one of my books. And this guy was using one proverb after another. He was speaking in English, but he was using one proverb after another. Then I realized they are all taken from Chinua Achebe. Things fall apart, you know. So sometimes we can do that. Conrad, he may not have used Polish proverbs, but he started learning English at the age of 19, is what I understand, Conrad. So, and even his spoken English was not particularly great, right? You know, but look at the majesty of his sentences, you know, in a lot of his novels, you know. So there's a way you might, being a foreigner to a language, you might bring some other elements into that language, quite frankly, you know, and that arise from your experience of another language, yeah. In fact, you can help in adding the possibilities in the other language into which you are writing. And my quarrel, this is my digression here. My quarrel with, not quarrel, it's a too strong a word. My critique, say, even of James Joyce and others, the Anglo, the Irish writers who write in English and so on, you know, and who are very venerated. And they wrote very good books, don't get me wrong, you know, very great stuff, you know. But no matter what they did, including borrowing phrases and expressions from the Irish, what they were doing eventually is helping develop the possibilities of English language, not Irish. There's nothing, not a single thing that James Joyce did that resulted in the enrichment of Irish language, although he borrowed a lot of things from the Irish language, you know. What he ended up is enrich English language. If you write in Swedish, nothing wrong with it as such, but you are helping enriching the Swedish language from your own experiences and so on. So you can, even that foreignness can help in enriching the language in which you are writing. Yeah. In fact, it might help a little bit. Yeah.
I was wondering, Ngugi, if you could talk a little bit about, because you were presented with your book last night by the publisher. I was wondering if you could talk to us a little bit about the kind of material dissemination of books in African languages or books by African authors in your experience, and the kind of dominance of the material conditions of production of texts, right? Which limit, that is, so there's a politics in the language and there's a hierarchy and stuff, but there are also these other constraints that have happened. And so, and I know you've had lots of experience with various
Oh, yes.
publishing. So maybe you could just give us a little bit of a sense of that as well.
You know, I keep on talking about decolonizing the mind. You know, one of the terrible consequences of language in some ways is the way it conditions one to think, to see the world through that language. And it can be normalized so that you don't, when you think of certain things, you think they can only be expressed in that language, you know. And this is one of the problems with the post-colonial intellectual production, right? That there comes a moment in a post-colony, where the elite of that country, you know, have so normalized intellectual production in terms of English or French and so on, that they cannot think of any other way, you know. And they got there's a little bit of compartments in their heads. With African languages, that's for jokes. When you say something very funny, then I might say Nigikoyo to a Arabic speaker, and then we laugh, ha 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 ha, right? But when we become serious now and talk about serious matters, now is, or what we think are serious matters, that's in English. And you find this all over the continent, not just, right? African language becomes languages for little jokes, you know, or sentiment, okay? Or sort of memories of the past. But when you want serious stuff, you know, intellectual concepts and so on, you know, into English. Now, the same mental attitude conditions in the production of books, right? In fact, there was a time when production of books in African languages, they always use the poorest possible paper, right? Yeah, the poorest possible paper. That's one thing. That's whenever they accept a book written in an African language. And then even bookshops, the display, they are put in African language books are put in a heap by themselves in a corner. You don't even see them. The editorial work on such a book, very poor, you know, because, you know, that one you can just do it. Then the mental landscape changes completely when it comes to books in English. They become serious editorial work, you know, good quality paper, you know, display in bookshops, much better, right? You know, and I've seen this myself with my own books, you know, and sometimes how my publishers, some of them anyway, treat my books in Ikoyo and the same books in English, you know, even the same book in English, you know. Now, my first publisher, though, in Ikoyo was very, very good. The one thing he did with my first novel in my mother tongue, Devil on the Cross, was to give it a good editor. In fact, you know him, Professor Kandi of Princeton.
Yeah.
He was my first editor. How we call? Yeah. So he brought us into the editing of my Eco book. He brought the same seriousness as he brought into his editing of English books. Then the production, we insisted, and the publisher was aware of this, on the same kind of paper as used for publishing English novels, right? And the difference was immediately visible. Because even before you read the book, you feel, oh my God, you can see respect in the production of the book, as opposed to the part where the very production told you the book was particularly important, right? But that mental attitude still continues in some ways. Not with my publishers are quite good about this in the quality of the work. My last work in Gikuyu is an epic called Kedamo Yoru, and it really was produced on very good special paper in Kenya, very good. And immediately, when the book is put side by side with English books on display, you can see people naturally gravitate towards that one, just picking it, even if they're not buying it, just picking it up and so on. But for most publishers, that other previous condition is still, that other mentality still conditions how they look at books. But even then, still getting an African language book published is really a big task. Yeah, because we are conditioned by those attitudes of hierarchy, again, in the production of books. Yeah. You think of English as higher, therefore immediately the mental attitude changes, everything, the muscles, everything, intellectual muscles and physical muscles change into that particular book. You have to give a seriousness, thoughtfulness, and so on. The other one, relax. You can, yes, this one, But that's changing, but it take a lot of work to change the mental landscape. Yeah.
But that means that we will not have access to, 99% of the African language, science, literature, whatever you want to say, right? I mean, so it really constrains our ability to know what.
What I've been advocating in Kenya and other places, or wherever I go anyway, is that it has to be an alliance. There's no way alliance of the publisher, the government, the publisher, the writer, and of course the readers or bookshop owners. That alliance has to be there. Any one of the elements missing makes it even harder for those languages to function. But we need that alliance. This is where translation comes in. Fortunately, my novels in Gikuyu have been translated into many languages, but not yet into other African languages. And that's why the Jalada translation project became very, very important for me to see, because their focus was on Africa to African language translation. But now the upright revolution has, in other words, it is blossomed into a global conversation among languages, literally. Yeah. But their initial interest was in African to African translation. Then it's extended to conversation with all, languages, if they can. That's why I'm very excited about it. But in terms of production, I've not yet seen, except in Gambia, where they produce the book in print form, in Wolof and 3 languages. Not Wolof. What are the 3 languages spoken in Gambia? Wolof,
Fulani and Mandang.
Yeah.
Right.
I think they brought the story in the three languages and very well produced. Yeah. But the one I was given last night, and the ones produced in Spain are particularly well produced. Really, I've been looking at it. Even when I went back to my room last night, I was still looking at I was still admiring the quality of the production. And it appeared as if it was a different story. Now, I would like to see African languages giving that story or any other the same kind of attention and quality. Yeah.
Other questions? Baba.
Thank you. Thank you for coming, and thank you for your talk yesterday. It was really inspiring. This is a question that I've been thinking about myself with my work. It has to do with the concept of negritude. It's a global concept of solidarity for the Black diaspora. But the master narrative is that negritude is a French concept, right? Because when we look at negritude and try to trace it with the brutality of, for example, colonialism, the Caribbean, they experienced slavery, but within the plantation. In America, this idea of lynching. South Africa, we have the apartheid movement. But the master narrative is that when we talk about negritude, they tell us, or the negritude I see the way it has been sort of like traced. The historical narrative is that, it's different stories. Slavery, colonialism, lynching, the apartheid, those are different kind of blackness. So you can't use those concepts to study. You can't use the concept of negritude to study, for example, apartheid, colonialism, the problem of plantation in the Caribbean, because it's different sort of like device of brutalizing the black body. And I think that's completely wrong. So I just, I guess if you have any idea of seeing how negritude can be used as a concept of solidarity within the Black diaspora.
No, I didn't quite catch. You're saying lynching and others are different idea?
Yes.
Like lynching used in relation to, say, the African-American experience?
Right. The African-American, well, for example, the African-American experience is different with the apartheid experience, the slavery in the Caribbean, colonialism. But I think they are not different.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. We've been talking about negritude here now, because I like those poets. Like Senghor from Senegal. I don't read French, but even with the English translation, it's really, I find them to be very beautiful poems. And the work of Aimé Césaire from Martinique, of course, very unique in itself, So, because they were really masters also of the French. Now, my problem with negritude then is this, as with African writing in general, what Senghor says about blackness, like his poem Black Mother and others, which are so beautiful, even in English translation. I really wish he had also said it in Wolof, right? In other words, there's nothing, you cannot be in a position where I can only express my black beauty in English, right? I can only complain about my needs and desires only in English and French. And I mean, that was what I have quarreled, but then with the entire African intellectual tradition, of which I'm a part, so I don't have a holier than thou attitude. right, if the way Senghor writes, he had written in all of just the beauty, he'd have really, I think, done a lot for all of, and French in translation, right? That's my quarrel. Otherwise, in essence, whether in South Africa, whether in the Caribbean, or the plantation, wherever, you can think of colonialism as a plantation at home, and slave and plantation as plantation abroad, if you like. I don't know, for the black body, that is, But in all, what's common in all of them is the exploitation of the black body, but at the same time brutalizing it, at time. That's common in the slave and the plantation of the enslaved America, in the Caribbean, and in the colonial plantations. Yeah. Brutalizing black body, making it ashamed of itself, making it feel it's not able to do this and that and the other, associated with negativity and so on. Yeah? So the other reaction then becomes almost organically natural, No, my body, black is my body, right? Just like your body, if you are white, is your body, right? And black is power, black is beautiful, or whatever, right? It's a natural kind of, reaction. The problem, as I see, is that we said black is beautiful in English or French. I wish you could say it in Ikoyo also, and in Wolof, and so on. I might, though, talk a little bit, and repeat what I said last night when I was answering one of the questions about the Caribbean and the African-American experience. Because the languages developed by African-American people and Caribbean peoples or Haitian people, those languages, the new languages which they developed, in a way, by their very being, they were a language of resistance in a sense that their African languages were actually banned in a plantation. Yeah? They were criminalized. They had only English or French sound systems, So what then they did with the imposed sound systems and the brutalization of their language, then becomes something new. The creolality becomes something new, something really powerful, And it's only in the, well, I would say the only, but largely in the Caribbean over the last 500 years in America, or diaspora, where you found new functioning languages developed. And some of those languages, like in the African-American case, have done really wonders, I think of the spiritual. I may have mentioned that last night. The spiritual, the melodies of the spiritual really is still very powerful even today. The melody developed in the plantation, right? The melody, that spirit was the first to talk of freedom and independence. Because remember, the slave owner of the plantation did not have to talk about freedom and independence. Independence from what? Or freedom. It could only be articulated by the enslaved. So even American independence and so on, already those ideas are all anticipated in the spiritual, okay? Because the master had how would he be singing? He wants freedom, freedom from what? Right? Already there, So then we come to jazz. Again, jazz I'm not really a historian of jazz, but some things are very obvious. That the enslaved did not have access to those orchestral instruments, but whatever was discarded by the master, he would pick it and add to it other sounds. In Trinidad, they made music from oil. Have you ever heard of music from oil? Right? You know, music from oil. Because they got some of those oil drums in Trinidad, cut them, because if the drum was burned, then they created their own drums out of the oil, right? So you get steel drums and so on, you know. So generally, but jazz is a production of that language system developed in the plantation, you know. And hip-hop today, really, all over the world, whether from Japan to I don't know where, you know, you find the rhythms being used. Now, but we tend to disconnect that from the language system that produced it, right? The language system which produced, we call it broken English, but we love the music produced by it. So for me, what was produced in the African American plantation and Caribbean actually is very, very interesting. Yeah, new, tremendous contribution to global culture and so on. So I can only have respect also to the language systems that produced that kind of musical output. And I don't like it when people talk about it as being broken English or not so good English. It's a different system, signifying system. It's not a system of power. You still have to contend with the language of power or with the accent of power if necessary. Because you still have to go apply for a job, you still go to get a job at the university or this and that and so on. You know, but we cannot ignore what those language systems also have produced by way of culture, global culture, in fact. Yeah.
I think that's a very good place to end because it's a celebration of productivity and creativity. It kind of harkens back, I think, to our very first session on translation as creativity. So I want to thank Ngugi for his energy and commitment and his continued productivity and creativity.